Hi, Jeremy.
Hi.
Hi. So I'll just wait if there's a couple more people that want to join the main room, and then we can get started.
Luke, I have two of you. I know uh, people sometimes question whether one can have too much of a good thing, but
I don't think he can hear you because he has three computers going.
ah,
So his audio is in the back in the room before, and then he's
okay.
got two here. So yeah. I guess we can get started now. So first of all, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining. And most of you know how these meet and greets work. We'll be having a few sessions, some going for an hour, some going for up to 3 hours. And most of the sessions will be taking place in this main room, except for remembering Joseph Agassi, which will take place in another room. But we'll let everyone know when we're going to jump over to that one. So most of the time we can just stay in this one. The sessions will be recorded. So if you don't want to be on camera or be recorded, you can turn your camera off. And you can also change your name if you want, and you can press the mute button as well. If you're having troubles with anything during the sessions, you can type in chat. I'll also put something up here. There's also a room that you can jump into if you click on the breakout rooms at the bottom. There's a room that says if you need help with Zoom. So you can jump in there if you're struggling with anything and we can help you out. Um, but mostly we'll be having discussions, and then if you need to raise your hand, if you'd like to have a question or have something to say, at the bottom there's a reactions. So you can click on reactions and then there's a raise hand button. And then I can see you and then we can go to the people that have raised their hands. What else? Okay, so we also have some other rooms in the breakout rooms, which again is that button you can press at the bottom that says breakout rooms. So the ones that say more with is kind of if we're having a topic in this main room and the discussion wants to continue, you can jump into another room and continue that discussion if we're moving on to a new topic. And I think that's pretty much everything. So did anyone want to begin by introducing themselves, letting us know a little bit about yourself and how you came across the philosophy of Karl Popper? Know if anyone wants to volunteer and go first. Rafe, did you want to let us know how you?
Oh yes, I wanted to volunteer. Thanks, Elise. I
Sure.
forgot. Uh, yeah, well, I've got a bit of an advantage over some people because I've got a letter from Karl Popper where I'm commissioned as his champion in Australia. I'm very proud of that, of course. Never mind. Well, I'm an Australian. Studied agricultural science, and I was introduced to Karl Popper by my supervisor, who during my postgraduate work. And I realised that you had a better chance of getting a favourable introduction to Popper if you did agricultural science than if you did philosophy. There's something very strange about the philosophical climate in Australia, which has bred anti-Popperians, notoriously David Stove, who created a bit of a cult following
Okay,
with
am
his
I right now in the main room?
ongoing polemics against Popper. And so my supervisor was introduced to Popper by his soil science teacher. He was introduced to Popper by a meteorologist who came over from New Zealand, where he'd been one of a significant number of scientists who were very keen on Popper. Anyway, so the thing is to do agricultural science and not philosophy, if you wanted to find out about Popper. Well, that's probably just about enough about me. There's several other people here to introduce themselves. But I guess I should say I've just been very active in the Popper field. I've got about 15 Kindle books up, several on Popper and related topics. I had a most delightful experience for probably meeting Jeremy Shermer at Popper's place when I went to visit in 1972. This won't embarrass Jeremy, it's just a funny story, but Popper, we arranged on the phone. I'd turn up about 2:30 High Wycombe on Wednesday afternoon, and Karl said he'd have a copy of the BBC Listener under his arm. That was to distinguish him from all the other people who might have been thronging the platform at that time of day. Well, he was the only one there, so I didn't really notice what he had under his arm. But Jeremy told me later, when they arrived at the station, to Popper's horror, they'd left the BBC Listener at home. But Popper, not disconcerted, went to buy another one, but the kiosk had sold out. So pressing on boldly, Popper bought a copy of the London Times, which is a big spreadsheet, and he folded up a sufficient number of times to be approximately the shape of the BBC Listener. He then drove to his home, and I remarked sometime or other that it was a good thing that the traffic was light and the distance was short. And Jeremy said, well, you could say that Karl had a positive attitude to driving, but we got there. Anyway, that was a wonderful way to meet Popper and a wonderful thing to meet Jeremy as well. So that's it. Welcome all, and who's next?
Wonderful. So Jeremy, at that time, were you working
Pardon?
as Popper's, research assistant during that time, Jeremy?
Yes, I worked for Popper for 8 years as his full-time research assistant. I was based in an office at the LSE, but I would typically go out to see him at High Wycombe once or twice a week, and also we'd be working by telephone. But it's worth noting that at that time, there were no personal computers, there was no internet, library catalogs were not on computers either. So what I was engaged in doing bears no relationship to the world in which we are currently living. I think Luke is going to ask me a little bit about my time with Popper later in the sessions, and so I won't go on. The only thing I would say is this in relation to what Rafe was saying. Popper, alas, was driving when I was first working for him, but gradually this stopped. He also, meeting Rafe on High Wycombe Station, it was a country station in basically a commuter area. So out of commuter hours, there was really nobody there. When I was first going to be interviewed by Popper to work for him, was supposed to come and meet him at High Wycombe, but I got the wrong train. There were trains that went from Paddington to High Wycombe, which is a kind of main express line going in that direction. And there were also trains from a smaller station in London called Marylebone. And there happened to be trains departing at exactly the same time from both. And as a consequence, as you can probably imagine, I got the train from the wrong, from Marylebone. He met the one from Paddington, and I wasn't there. And things got gradually better after that, but there tended to be general chaos. Popper also tended to kind of overmanage small things. So this business with the listener is not untypical. One would tend to get extremely detailed directions about utter trivia, but it all done in a very caring spirit. Sorry, I'll shut up now because you've got other people wanting to come in.
Lovely, thank you. Harry, did you want to introduce yourself and how you came across Popper?
Right. First of all, I'm a definite contrast to both Rafe and Jeremy. I'm not a professional philosopher. I'm a bit of a groupie. I got introduced in 1970 by a friend who was, I had extensive philosophical discussions with. He was a student of Gilbert Ryle's, DPhil student. He told me I had to read him. I did. I was hooked. I've been reading his books as they came, books by and about Popper since then. And my interest was reinvigorated a couple of years ago by a friend of mine called Shachar, who is also a friend of the now deceased Agassi, Joseph Agassi, and got interested in his work as well, and wished that I had paid more attention to Agassi's work when I first came across Agassi, which was in the Schilp 2-volume Festschrift way back. And somehow let that pass me by, and I'm hoping to pick up more on Agassi's work in particular. And I still have one or two things of Popper that I haven't read, and not to mention commentaries, including Jeremy's book on the political thinking, which I hope to hear about more later today, which I'm sad to say I've only read the first 2 chapters so far, Jeremy, apologies. I mean, that's my background. I'm interested particularly in how his ideas can be used in relation to social/political activity. That's really all I need to say, and answer questions, obviously.
Wonderful, thank you, Harry. Would anyone else like to volunteer, or if anyone wants to raise their hand? Ed, would you like to go?
Yeah, are you speaking to me?
Yes, yeah.
I was introduced to Karl Popper in the mid-70s by a college professor, and he briefly mentioned Karl Popper and the Open Society, and then my interest in the Open Society was, of course, Plato and Marx. At that time, I was reading Althusser, and so the Marx end of it was really interesting. And then I went into life and ignored it, Popper. Picked up again in the 90s, and then again started ignoring Popper. And then I'd say in the last 5 years, it's become more important. I'm in the US, and politics kind of important to me. And so Popper seemed like the place to go. And I have an interest in climate. And it's Popper's epistemology, approach epistemology is important because of anti-science and what I call Stalin-esque politicians. So I can't go on.
Yeah. So are you finding that Popper's work is really helping you solve modern problems today in the US?
Yeah. Rafe's champions, guides have been very helpful. Because I try to communicate with people in the climate community, especially the Arctic region, which is so critical today. And that seems to be the linchpin to this issue. So here I am.
Wonderful. Well, lovely to have you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Who else would like to go? Chen, did you want to introduce yourself and let us know how you came across Popper?
Thank you. I never came across him personally. I was a student of Joseph Agassi, and I became acquainted with Popper's work through Agassi. And maybe my most obvious contribution to the present discussion would be to report that the first time I became aware of this idea that is called fallibilism, it struck me strange that such an obvious fact of life, obvious claim that all people are fallible should receive such a such a pompous word with an ism at the end, until it dawned on me that in this view that all people are fallible, the operative word is all. Because all of us can, most of us at any rate, accept it, that we are fallible. And most of us accept it that most of the people that we know are fallible. But many people make exceptions, and fallibilism makes no exceptions. And that was a big, what's the word for it? Insight for me. And a big thing. And my interest in that was mainly because it was shortly after I studied as an undergraduate in university about what is called Hume's problem, and about all these people that tried to solve Hume's problem. And Immanuel Kant, I think, even thought that he managed to do it, which of course he did not. I think this goes without saying. And the big innovation of Karl Popper in this respect was in saying, friends, let us accept it that Hume was right and see where this takes us on. And I think this is a big thing. That's what I had to say.
Yeah. It really does have far-reaching applications and consequences, like even in everyday life, and the idea of critical rationalism, admitting that you could be wrong. It has very far-reaching effects, for sure.
Yeah. Yes.
Thank you for sharing, Jen.
If I can add, I also became quite captured with Agassi's contributions to Popper, and it saddens me to this day very much. Yeah, many years after Popper's death, and 6 months after Agassi's death, that Popper never accepted them, actually. That's
Interesting.
it. Yeah.
Perhaps we might hear more about that during Agassi's session in a couple of hours.
Oh, I'm looking forward. I'm looking forward.
Yeah, thank you. Yep, Jeremy?
Could I just make a comment about fallibilism? Because it seems to me that we're currently living through a period in which that has been abandoned almost wholesale by people who are convinced that their ideas about their identity and their rights and their entitlements are something which is absolutely secure and concerning which they don't need to have the kind of dialogue that Popper was commending with other people who disagree with them. So, I mean, I take Hans' point that at a certain level, fallibilism is obviously correct. I would say, well, in the world in which we're living, I tend to say increasing numbers of people behave as if that's not the case.
The world is full of true believers.
It would help if that idea of fallibilism and dialogue and discussion and being open to discussion was not such a bad thing, that it was actually considered a good thing. That would be nice. Okay, would anyone else like to go next? Lucio, I think if I said your name correctly. Lucio, or we can go to Diana. You have your hand raised.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Diana. I'm a psychologist, and that's how I implicitly got introduced to Popper. And yes, I'm happy to join. That's all.
I don't
Happy to
see.
have you.
Oh, no, I don't see Diana. Oh,
It's because I'd like to keep my video, down.
oh. Okay.
It was explicitly stated that this is a prerogative of anyone who wishes to do so.
Yes, yeah.
Yes.
And just another reminder, we are going to be recording these sessions. So if you don't feel comfortable to be recorded, you can turn your camera off and that's completely fine. So, okay, we'll go to the next person. Is it Lucio or Lucio?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, my name is Lucio.
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 Yeah, Lucio. I live in Italy. I teach here in Italy, and I became familiar with Popper's work during my dissertation time. So a long time ago, unfortunately. and I'm an economist, and I've been then discussing his theories and more generally the question of the philosophy of social sciences and what could be actually applied from natural sciences or physics, that was actually the main reference for Popper, to social sciences with the sharp let's say ontological and epistemological differences that social sciences have with the natural sciences. So that's it. Basically, I continue to work into the field of methodology and epistemology of social sciences, and so this is my connection with Popper's legacy, let's say.
Wonderful. Okay, so do you have any papers published or anything that we can go to see your work?
Yeah, sure, I do.
Okay, and we can just find that online, or?
So maybe I don't know how to.
Okay, yeah, you can share it on chat if you'd like to share anything.
Okay.
And I guess that goes for everyone as well. Like if you'd like to share anything that you're discussing or referencing or any of your work.
Okay, Elise, how do share? So what's the
So
technical means?
I just did a chat, so something should have popped up, and if you click that, you can get to the chat, or you can click on the chat button at the bottom.
Yeah, I can use
Yeah.
the chat and attach the paper, maybe. Okay.
Yes, yeah, that'd be
Okay,
wonderful.
that's
Thank
the easiest
you.
way. Okay,
Yes,
good.
thank you.
I
Lovely to
don't
have
know if
you.
you can attach the paper, but you can attach the message. Can you attach the paper as well? I didn't know that.
I
Paper
think
as
you
well,
can. Yeah, I think you can actually attach a file.
Oh, apologies.
So yeah, see how you go, and if you struggle with anything, you can always reach out to me or any of the other organizers, and we can see how we can work it out.
Yes,
Okay.
not forgetting to send a message to everyone. If you reply to the last message, only Elise will get
Yes.
that.
Yes, that's true. So when you're in the chat, when it says to, there's a button that says everyone. If you click on that, you can choose everyone, or you can choose only specific people who will see the chat. Okay, so we can go to Kane. If you would like to introduce yourself and how you came across the philosophy of Popper.
Okay, my name is Kang Kyung-hoon. I'm from South Korea, and I'm interested in Karl Popper's philosophy. My major was philosophy. In Korea, our philosophy student must study an Eastern, Asian, and Western European study both. So we are very mixed philosophy. We have a very mixed philosophy. I have 5 volumes of Popper's Popper's Korean edition. This is Korean edition.
Wow.
Yeah. Let me just a minute.
Yeah.
This is unended cast.
Yep.
And conjectures and reputations.
Oh wow.
And open society and its enemies.
Mhm.
And our life is solving is
Problem solving.
published by edited version, revised version in recently.
Mm.
So in Korea, there are many purpose books, but in Korean, people are not interested in pop philosophy and humanitas. So I'm very sad.
So in Korea, you in philosophy, you learn Eastern and Western philosophy. Was that correct?
Yes, both.
Sure.
We
Okay.
learn both. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. So how did you find Popper then if it's not in the schools?
In Korean philosophy, in Korean Department of Philosophy, main thema is European phenomenology and socialism philosophy. So I'm not interested in curriculum.
Okay, I see.
Mm.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for sharing and welcome. I remember you from January, so it's good to see you again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Me too.
So Steve, did you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I studied philosophy as a undergraduate in the early to mid 1970s. Kept interested and became an autodidact. I was mainly brought up considering the issues of the British empiricists. You kind of put a kibosh that I felt like philosophy had a hard time reacting to, and decided to go in the different directions beyond Kant's attempt. Was really unsatisfied with most of what I had seen. I went into a business and politics on a practical level, and I'm a businessman primarily. Had been in elected office, but I always kept up my studies and reading. And the first person that really seemed to put together a valid response that I could accept, that I could work through to the problems of induction that Jung came up with was Karl Popper. And I discovered that through the logic of scientific discovery. That was probably in the mid to late 80s. And not long after, as I was reading through more of his work, I discovered through this odd thing called America Online, various chat groups. This is going back in the early 90s. And I made acquaintance with Rafe Champion. We've been corresponding or talking, or more listening than coming up with anything unique to Rafe and the Rat House and various forums that he has introduced me to directly or indirectly. So I've been kind of like a pilot fish following where he has gone. So I just continue to maintain an intellectual interest in all things Karl Popper. And to get ready for this, I've reread a couple of his works of late. The one I have had on my desk and never read, Unended Quest, I really didn't have a good or as good a grasp of his intellectual and life's autobiography. So I thought that was interesting for anyone who has not read that.
I love that one. And he really covers a lot of topics in that book as well, which is very interesting. And lovely to have you also. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
So who would like to go next? If anyone wants to volunteer, you can raise your hand. If you press the reactions button at the bottom, there's an option to raise your hand. And anytime during the sessions that you want to have a question or say something, you can always use that option, that button. Is it Elriza? I'm so sorry, it's hard to say that name.
Alireza, yes.
Yes, thank you.
Hi.
Would you like to introduce yourself and how you came across the philosophy of Karl Popper?
I'm Hi, everyone. I'm Ali Reza Mansouri from Iran. I'm faculty member of Institute for Humanities and Cultural Studies, and I received email for this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, and it's good to have you. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Is it possible, Ali Reza, for you to say a bit more about yourself and your intellectual interests and the background in philosophy in Iran and how that relates or doesn't relate to your interest in Popper?
Yeah, sure. I received my PhD in philosophy of science in Iran. My dissertation was quantum measurement, the philosophical foundations of quantum mechanics in measurements problem. My previous supervisor was Dr. Ali Paya, and via him I make acquaintance with critical rationalism and interested in Popper's philosophy. And currently in some recent years, I am working on critical rationalism and doing some research in this area. And I taking part in some schools and lectures that Professor Schirmer held, and it was interesting for me. Is there anything I can say?
Wonderful. That's perfect. Thank you. Badanan, would you like to introduce yourself? Thank you. Thank you.
I think it's my turn. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I'm Badinan, one of the researchers on Karl Popper's ideas. But because of my age, which is come across with the Popper too lately. It was just 2020 that I started I finished my MA thesis on Karl Popper's idea perspective about the concept of historicism and the concept of history, because my specialization is philosophy of history. So I took his idea about these two concepts. And during my MA thesis, I translated the poverty of historicism from English to Kurdish language. Then after my finishing my MA thesis, I translated another book of Karl Popper, which is All Life is Problem Solving. And for this book, I received the translated permission from the University of Klagenfurt. Unfortunately, Professor Jeremy Schirmer has written his preface to Kurdish edition, and I'm thankful for that. Anything else I can say? Just ask, please.
Wonderful. Thank you. So you specialize in historical philosophy.
Well, philosophy of history.
Philosophy.
Let me explain this. What's called these terms by this way, that all of the philosophers that we have has a kind of definition for not just history but for life. How we start from the beginning and how we go. How we, for example, what future we can get it. But Karl Popper, as a philosopher, tried to tell us the future is open and there is no determined future. That, for example, religious beliefs or some philosophical ideas, accounts like Karl Marx, Plato, or Hegelian philosophy, believe that there is a future, for example, for humanity, that we will sooner or later we will reach this future. And this kind of prediction in Karl Popper's perspective called prophecy, which is not a basis on the scientific basis. It doesn't have a scientific basis.
Sure.
So he tried to tell us, so what's history, how we can what methodological approach we can try to use to understand the historical events that happened from the back of humanity.
Yeah. So instead of trying to find like there's some kind of order or kind of sometimes they label it as a scientific order to history that they can then predict the future based off that. And Popper's saying that we cannot do that.
Yeah, of course. The philosophers try to tell us that the history has a course, a trend that we can't predict or for example, the final stage or the latest stage of humanity, or what's the next stage of for example, our history. But Karl Popper tells us that there are many possibilities. We can, for example, billions of possibilities that may happen in the future. So that's why we cannot say that the future will be like this or like that. So, so even say that it's not the task of historians or the philosophers to tell us about the future, but what's the main task of science in general is that to solve the problems that we have. That's why he say that all life is problem solving, because every era, in any era that we live in, I mean human living in the era, there are problems, scientific problems, and we can say the factual problems that we have to try our best. Scientific persons, philosophers try to their best to solve these problems, not try to a kind of predict the future.
Yeah.
This is something. Wonderful. May I ask a question?
Of course.
This is something about Popper's view about historicism that I myself have a problem with, and maybe you can answer that. Is there no predicting the future at all, according to Popper?
Well, prediction in Karl Popper's perspective, as far as I know, he believed that a kind as natural sciences has a kind of future prediction, and prediction is a part of science which is important to tell us, for example, what will happen. But he thinks that the main task of the science is not to tell us what will happen in the future, but try to solve the problems that we have in present time.
Yeah, Jeremy wants to speak, I think.
Yes.
Could I just on this?
He knows better, yes, of course.
Well, no. I mean, but could I just on this say that what Popper was critical of was the idea that there was a kind of telos to or underlying aim or goal to history, and that this was unconditional in its character. So from his point of view, predictions are perfectly possible, but they have to be conditional ones. And
that is what I was trying to hear. Thank you very much.
Just as a tiny writer to it, I mean, one might make predictions which are conditional, but where one is pretty sure of what some of the conditions are. I mean, for example, you may have people who rightly call our attention to problems of climate change. Someone, though, might make a prediction along the lines of saying, if things continue as they are at the moment, then everything will be a disaster. They might also say, well, I actually suspect that it's going to be very difficult to get people to behave in ways differently from how they are at the moment. And they might then go on and explain a whole bunch of reasons for this. And so they might say, well, I'm pretty sure that there is a disaster facing us, but they might equally say, but of course, this is a complex matter, And any prediction of this kind, it depends on certain conditions, and that the assumptions that I'm making about it, they may say, may well be wrong, or we may well be able to change people's behavior or change people's minds in ways that currently I don't think we're going to be able to.
Mhm.
Yeah. So it's like working with the closed systems in science, whereas working with like complex systems like society and trying to make predictions about human behavior, and that is not as closed and not conditional in that way. Kane, did you have your hand raised?
Who, me?
Kane, yeah. Oh, Kane, sorry.
Yeah, me.
Kang, sorry.
Sorry.
The correct pronunciation is Kang.
Kang, thank you.
Kang.
Yes. I'm the only East Asian. I believe this debate, it's in my own opinion, I believe this debate 뭐라고 해야 되지? The debate will be very wide in social science. So we will focus on the essence of philosophy and humanitas, and we will focus on in our mind and inner mind. It's on my opinion. Thank you.
Yeah, wonderful. So we'll go to, I think, who jumped in after that? Sakban, if you wanted to introduce yourself. Yeah, no pressure. If no one wants to speak, you don't have to, but yeah, did you want to?
Okay, thank you. This but here afternoon. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. You are morning, yeah?
Well, we're from all over the world, so.
In Korea, it's the evening.
Yeah, evening, yes, just like you. I'm from Indonesia.
Yeah. So do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came across the philosophy of Karl Popper?
Okay, when I was in my undergraduate program, I a little bit about Popper, especially about falsificationism or fallibilism. But now I'm teaching in sport and physical education department. So my focus here, when we talk about the idea of national, but according to Popper, I'm still wondering about the idea of sport nationalism. Sport nationalism in from the perspective of critical rationalism. Is it good for us or not? That's my focus of discussion now. Thank you.
What was it? Spot rationalism compared to critical rationalism?
Sport nationalism. The contribution of sport in strengthening the spirit of them.
Sport nationalism.
Sport. Yeah. Sport. Yes. Like football.
Yeah.
And so on.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I follow Professor Jeremy about nationalism, Popper always criticized about the idea of nationalism, right? And that's why we need the idea of sport nationalism.
Interesting.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. It's lovely to have you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so is it Boaz? Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I can introduce myself. I got to know very little about Karl Popper from Mr. Agassi. I joined this group of Agassi's group about a year and a half ago, and since then I enjoyed very much. I'm basically an engineer, so this entire philosophy world is brand new for me. So I try to capture as much as I can and learn from everybody else. Thank you. I'm from Israel.
Wonderful. Thank you. It's lovely, lovely to have you join us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nimrod, would you like to introduce yourself?
I don't see Nimrod. Oh, yeah, I see him.
Nimrod.
Yeah.
Nimrod
If you're struggling to find the mute button, it should be on like the bottom left-hand corner. But no, yeah.
Or just press and hold the space bar. If you're desperate.
He might not be
yeah.
not be at the microphone.
Yeah.
What about Orsini? He's with us.
Oh, Orsini, yes, thank you. Thank you, Jeremy.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I'm driving, so but I still can contribute. I'm Orsini Taiwo Afisi, from Nigeria. I wrote my PhD thesis on Popper at the University of Canterbury in New Zealand, and most of my writings have been on Popper. I was also a convener to a conference on Popper in Africa in 2019. It was sponsored by the Karl Popper Charitable Trust. Thanks to Jeremy Sharma and David Miller. What else? What I do with Popper is to contextualize Popper's writings, especially social and political philosophy, to situations, political situations in Africa. And yeah, basically that. But my main thesis is about Popper, Popper's liberal communitarianism, saying that there is a balance of individualism and a social dimension to Popper, for which I have called liberal communitarianism. And yeah, basically that's what my focus on Popper is. So I'm a Popperian and possibly the only one in this part of the world. Thanks very much.
Wow. Thank you, Asani. Lovely to have you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe you put your phone down.
Bart, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, hello. Hi, everyone. So I'm Bart from Belgium. Been into Popper, I don't know, like the past 4 years already. And I'm joining the Red Fest venue in Philadelphia in a couple of weeks. Professionally, I'm trying to apply Popper's ideas in management consulting. So I'm working with clients on business problems, but through the lens of epistemology and specifically Popper's epistemology. So where companies typically, do not look at knowledge as a specific way of looking at business, but they're looking at more behaviors and personalities and methodologies and justifications. And in that whole context, I'm trying to bring in more Popperian thinking. So more emphasis on the lens of knowledge creation, error correction in the wonderful world of business. Yeah, and that's a lot of fun.
That sounds very interesting. So what's the goal of that is to help businesses become more successful by helping them be better problem solvers?
Yes, so it's problem solving is central, but then a bit more the Popperian way, if you could say, like with the focus on openness and error correction, as opposed to justification and
yes,
and execution focus after justification only. So creating a bit more of an open environment and criticism and adaptation within teams around business problems like how to grow, or how to become more prosperous, and those kinds of questions.
Yeah, it's very important. Jeremy, you raised your hand. Oh, I'll just ask you to unmute.
Jeremy?
Yes, I just wondered if I could ask Bart a question. Popper emphasizes very much in his approach to knowledge the importance of objectification of knowledge, of sharing, and of opening things to criticism. But in the context of business, knowledge often is the basis on which an individual gets an income. And I just wondered if you faced this kind of difficulty, and if so, how you approached it.
Yeah, on the objectification, I think that's important. The way I'm treating it is that I also have a little software that I developed to make ideas and plans and goals literally objective, like putting them out there in some kind of representative or transparent way, so they are exposed to criticism as opposed to being only verbally shared. So yes, writing ideas down and adapting ideas in written form, visually represented, is part of my approach. The second part I didn't get.
Well, I'm sorry, it's connected, because often you can see people's ideas or skills, which just they have, as the basis on which they earn a living. For example, in the literature on knowledge management, there was a famous case where some Japanese people got permission to go to a hotel in, I think, Tokyo, where there was a chef who had been trained in bread making in Paris, and where essentially what they did was to study in detail the movements that he was making and incorporate them into their new bread making machine. Now, there is a sense in which, if one looks at the development of robotics and information technology, there are many, many cases in which basically people have been persuaded to articulate and objectify their skills and knowledge, and then they find basically that they're unemployed on the grounds that these then become the possession of anybody, and that they have actually lost the human capital which gave them a living. And I just wondered whether this is a problem, and if so, how you tackle it.
Yeah, well, yeah, now I understand the question better. It's less of a problem because the kinds of error correction that I'm focused on is in these kind of structured organization with a lot of silos and layers, where the real problem is that the individual expertise and the individual knowledge is not exposed against each other. And so the improvement of the knowledge and the error correction is really at the interfaces between silos and different layers. And so individually, I mean, people have a lot of expertise. They may or may not protect it a little bit, but once you have plans and goals, they cut through silos and across layers. And it's at those interfaces that there's a lot of important error correction to do, simply by sharing what kind of interfaces you're faced with, and how you have to adapt and correct plans and goals so that they can cross these interfaces, which make cooperation always much more difficult.
Well, I agree completely, but why I linked these things was because it seems to me that in principle there is a risk that once you have done your work and got people to articulate their assumptions and so on, other people in the firm will come along and say, that is most interesting. We can actually have our IT people take over doing that,
Not always,
and then just get rid of these people we've been employing before.
But it's not always so reproducible. People, you know, as a practical business person, and my main business is, you know, investing client portfolios in stocks and other securities. One thing I do bring from a Popperian perspective is before I invest in anything, if it scopes out to the types of things that I would prima facie want to see in a security, I can be wrong, I can be fallible. So I write down in advance, what would I have to be seeing to convince me that what I originally conjectured would not be true? And therefore I ought to take the opposite tact. And some of these types of skill sets just simply are not going to be, I mean, you can have all sorts of AI slash algorithms written, but they're just, you know, I don't know, that they will never be what a deft artisan can do. Though I will grant you that, you know, there is probably a lot of people whose positions may be in jeopardy given the type of data scraping that's going on. And I can relate a little bit to the management consulting because my wife was with Accenture for years in hospital mergers and integration. And that whole industry started from the accountants who basically would go into business A and business B that were in the same business, sort of. A was doing well and B was not. And they would go, hey, you want to know why B's doing so much better? Why? We can tell you. And so they would, the accountants would spill the beans and then collect fees for stealing other people's great ideas. And that's where consulting even came out of. But you know, it's a very open-ended world, and to think that anybody's got a lock on great ideas, if you want to be humbled, you get into my business and try to figure it out. You just try to bat better than the average bear.
And that's why I also wanted to add is that, I mean, there are always new problems. So you may share your existing knowledge about how to solve a past problem, but luckily, I mean, at the interfaces between silos and layers and you know, in relation to the complex external world, you're always faced with new problems. So, I mean, there's knowledge creation going on continuously. So you may copy the old existing shared knowledge, but next day, luckily, we're already solving new problems.
Yeah,
I do understand that this is a very interesting, intriguing discussion. I'm just worried about the time. We've only got a few minutes left of the meet and greet session. So I apologize if you don't mind if we introduce some more people that have jumped on board, and we can continue this discussion another time. Is that okay? Yeah. Thank you. So I wanted to go to Nimrod. If you'd like to introduce yourself and let us know how you came across the philosophy of Karl Popper.
I came across Joseph Agassi, and so I came across Popper. I was a BA student, and there was this seminar that everyone I consulted said don't go there. So I went there, of course, and that was Joseph Agassi's seminar. And suddenly, at the end of my BA, I started learning the philosophy that I was seeking throughout the BA, and I didn't find. So this is how I came across, and now I teach philosophy of social science and philosophy of science at Sapir College. I studied with Agassi. I did my PhD, and I became a colleague and wrote a few papers with him. And I'm very I study everything. Most of the time, I think being an academic is a very easy job, and it gives us a lot of time. We are very lucky because we can spend most of our time learning new stuff. So this is usually what I do.
Do your bosses
Wonderful.
warn your students against you like they warn, like Agassi's bosses warned you against him?
I hope so.
If not, then you have not attained.
Yes.
Very true. And I look forward to hearing more about you and your relationship with Agassi in the session coming up. And thank you for sharing, and thank you for joining us. So I'll move on. Thank you. I'll move on to Stephen. If Stephen, you'd like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I learned my Popper as a sociology graduate student and also philosophy graduate student, but more in sociology, strangely enough, because we had some sort of nighttime reading groups that read Popper, and things like Poverty of Historicism were still live issues for social science. So, and then I started publishing with Philosophy of Social Science, and not in a particular Popperian way, but it certainly was ingrained in the way that I thought about problems in philosophy of social science. And in 1981, I was at the American Political Science Association meetings, and somebody, I think like Fred Eidlin, said, "Here, come to dinner with us." And it was a cabal of Popperians, including Jarvie. And I realized all of a sudden, well, you know, actually I am a Popperian. So from that point on, I became a submerged Popperian, but always sympathetic. So.
Wonderful, thank you. And thank you for joining us. It's lovely to have you. Gabriel, would you like to introduce yourself?
Well, I see that we don't have a lot of time left, so I'll try to be really quick. I learned about Popper in middle school through YouTube, and in college I developed more interest in his philosophy. I formed a reading group with some friends of mine to read The Logic of Scientific Discovery. We did read the book, and I thought that it expressed really well well, first of all, it shattered a lot of beliefs, a lot of positivistic beliefs I had about science, and then it formed a conception of science which I just couldn't agree more. And then I moved on to reading a couple of other books from him, and well, then I learned about the Facebook group, and I've been extremely interested in Popperian philosophy ever since. So in short, that's how I got my interest in Popperian philosophy.
And if I remember correctly, you were writing a paper on Popper from the January one, and you're looking for some help. Did you still need help with that?
The paper I was writing was for my I never know how to say that in English. It's for an initiation on research from a university. It's nothing that actually got published. but the help I needed was to think about my a possible master's degree in Popperian philosophy, and I still do need that help.
Wonderful. Okay, well, as we continue on throughout the night, we'll be able to go further into more of these topics. I'm wondering, Margarita, are you in the room here with us? I think she might have popped in and popped out. But I was thinking we could just quickly introduce a couple more people, and then we're going to move on to remembering Ian Jarvie. And we'll be staying in this room, so you won't need to move to another room when we move on to that topic. Malanchi, is it? I'm sorry if I pronounced that incorrectly. Did you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Oh, hi. I'm Malachi or Malachi Cohen, and I knew both Ian Jarvie and Joseph Agassi, and I know many of the people that I can see right now here online. I got the message about this event only yesterday, and I'm in a rush for a lecture right now, but I did not want to write a lecture right now, so I would not be able to stay all day long, but I did not want to miss this event for Ian.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for joining us, even if it is just briefly.
Hang on, just a tick, Elise.
Yeah.
Malachi is the author of the monumental biography of Harford Popper's life.
Oh,
I think we should salute him, I think.
That's wonderful. The biography.
Yeah, I think it's a biography. Yeah, it was about Popper. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Where can we find that?
Well, in any good bookshop.
And Amazon.
What is it called? What's the title?
Oh, tell them, Malachi, I've forgotten.
Karl Popper, The Formative Years, 1902-1945, Cambridge University Press.
I have to look that up.
It's absolutely a key work on Popper. I mean, if you're interested in him, this is the place to go to.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I've just found it on cambridge.org. So I'll post that link in the chat if anyone wants to read that later.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. Margarita, I see you've joined us. I know we're running a little bit over time, but I just want to make sure that everyone's had a chance to introduce themselves. So if anyone hasn't introduced themselves yet and would like to quickly say hi and introduce yourself, if you could raise your hand. Oh, Nick, would you like to introduce yourself? Yeah, Nicolasi.
Hi. Hi, Elise.
Hi. Hi.
I'd like to give a quick shout out to Elise. I think you're doing an amazing job. You're a huge advocate for Popper and democracy. Excellent. And you're the one that introduced me to Karl Popper, actually. I remember once we're having a conversation about politics, and I was bringing up certain politicians, I should vote for this guy or vote for that guy. And then Elise came out and said, it's not about who's it's not about who leads. Who should rule. So it's about it's about their philosophies and protecting the weak from the strong. And I thought, wow, this is great philosophy. Where are you getting this from? And she goes, Karl Popper. So she showed me the little book that she had on Karl Popper, The Open Society and Its Enemies. I was trying to find it. So I think this is a problem that we're having with Karl Popper, is that it's this information or this literature of his is probably very difficult to find. I used to go to a local library when I was young, in my teenage years, and all I used to read about was Plato, Aristotle, all these big names. Obviously, there's not many writings about Socrates, but then you'll never find, or I shouldn't say never. Maybe there are certain libraries where it's available, but I didn't see this. So I had to find it. I had to look through various online stores to try and find it. I eventually found it. I bought it. I bought this and Conjectures and Refutations. Look, I'm just a student. I'm here observing, but I think it's great having, listening in on what everyone's got to say. And And I'd like to give a huge thanks to Elise because she's the one that introduced me to Karl Popper. That's my well, I was gonna say we had a laugh about it last night. I was gonna say actually, yeah, I met Karl Popper in a pub somewhere. We had a drink. I wish I had. I wish I had. That's not the case. So
I'm
I
not
have
sure if
met
he was much of
Elise.
a
We've
drinker.
had a drink at a pub with Elise. So not Karl
Yeah.
Popper, but yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that, Nick. And it's
Thank
lovely
you.
to have
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Thank you. Thanks. Is it Svi?
Yes.
Yeah. Would you like to introduce yourself and how you, just quickly as well, how you came across Karl Popper's philosophy?
Yeah, I was interested in, I'm coming from a technology world, startups and technology, and I was lately interested in Baruch Spinoza, the Jewish philosopher, and I asked Professor Agassi for a meeting, and from that meeting, I was introduced through Professor Agassi to Karl Popper, of course. And in the first meeting, Joseph talked to me about, we discussed Spinoza's philosophy, but during that meeting, he said to me, please remind me in the end of the conversation to tell you about my dream and about my startup. So since that, I worked with him on a very unique startup based on a philosophy idea. And maybe I will talk about it later.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Svi. We are just running out of time, but I do appreciate everyone for sharing and introducing yourselves and for everyone to be here. If there are people that we didn't have the chance to get to, I apologize. But hopefully later on, as the sessions continue, we'll be able to get to know everyone a lot more. So thank you all for being here.